are you today?
Good. How are you? It feels like forever ago that we met at Low Carb Adapt at that event you spoke at.
hmm That was March, I think, something like
That
that.
was when COVID hit.
That was right before, literally. It was like the last of it. Was like right when it was coming on. We kind of snuck in under the wires on the last sort of public gathering meetings that's been allowed. And I had to, I had all kinds of things lined up for the year. I was going to go to Spain and Brazil and, to Sweden, and all that got shut down. So crazy, crazy. But Karen, would you just, I'm not sure how many people in here know exactly who you are. Some of them aren't familiar with you. So would you just give us a little quick background if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Karen Thomson, and I am originally from South Africa. So Sean and I are kind of related, but not officially. And so I started work in an addiction treatment center that my husband and I established in 2005. And so we dealt with drug addicts and alcoholics and psychiatric conditions. And I myself have a history of addiction, and I am in recovery from that. And so when we were working with addicts and alcoholics in the clinic, I would see them coming in, and they would switch from one drug to another. And so they would switch from alcohol or, the hard drugs that they were on, and they would immediately switch to sugar and refined carbs. And so I was watching this process over a period of time and just realizing that these people are coming in and they're literally just switching to something else. And so we would see them when they came in, and they would be like super thin and just malnourished. And then a year later, I would see them where they got their 1 year clean time recovery chip, and they would be huge. I couldn't even recognize the people that had come into the clinic. And so I was during that time, I'd also had 2 kids, and I put on weight, and I couldn't eat as I had before because my hormones had completely changed. And I'd started putting on weight where before I could eat anything. I suddenly started putting on weight, and it really, really freaked me out. And so I started doing research into food addiction, and specifically, an addiction to refined carbs and sugar. And I found that it was a thing. And even though it wasn't recognized by everybody, out there, like I realized that there was something going on here. And then there's this South African sports scientist called Professor Tim Noakes. I'm sure some of you are familiar with him. And so I saw Prof. Noakes on this interview on TV where he had just found the low carb diet, and he mentioned sugar and addiction in the same sentence, and I was blown away. So I contacted him, and I was like, hey, let's start a sugar addiction program. We started a sugar addiction program, the first of its kind in the world. And then we started Inpatient. So we had inpatient, outpatient, and online programs. And from there, I wrote a book called Sugar Free, literally the longest title ever, Sugar Free, 8 Weeks to Freedom from Sugar and Carb Addiction. It became a bestseller there in South Africa. We published it in the UK, it became a bestseller there. And then my husband at the time and I decided that we wanted to move to the United States to start a sugar addiction and obesity clinic here, and also to try and get my kids out of South Africa to try and give them better opportunities at life. We got here like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, not realizing what a mess this healthcare system is in. And it was really hard to get anything going and to get any buy-in from medical professionals, despite the evidence that does suggest that sugar and refined carbs are addictive. And despite like this huge population, despite looking around, just being like so many of our population is morbidly obese, suffers from chronic disease, like something has to be done. And a nutritional intervention is the simplest and easiest solution. So it was really hard. And then during that time, I spoke at Low Carb USA. And in the audience, there was this guy who came up to me afterwards, and he was like, hey, I really loved your talk. Whatever. And we had a conversation, and it ended up being the CrossFit founder, Greg Glassman. And so he asked me to come on board and, and help him set up a division of CrossFit called CrossFit Health. Anyway, just back in South Africa, Prof. Noakes and I had also set up the world's first low carb conference, and we had like all the big names from around the world come together in the same space for the first time. So we had Stephen Finney, Gary Taubes, Jason Fung, Robert Sivers. Sean wasn't there, sadly. Just like a ton of people, a 3-day event. They came there, they were like, this is the first time we've ever met in person. This is amazing. And so, so that's really where the foundation of my work is. Sean, that was quite an intro. I'm sure you just wanted like a brief bio.
No, I mean, that's great. No, that's awesome. I want to go more into that stuff. Hey, and I wanted to definitely talk about the CrossFit health stuff because obviously CrossFit's obviously going through tremendous change right now through some of the craziness that's happened recently. But I want to go back to the time when you were in South Africa and you had the inpatient treatment center because, and what I see, and it's kind of funny, I recently moved, I shouldn't say so recently, it's been almost a year and a half, but before I actually lived next door to a home that actually housed people that were going through addiction. And it wasn't sugar addiction, but it was drug and alcohol addiction. It was women. And we would see, the women would come in and about every, I don't know, 2 months, a new crop would cycle in, but they were always eating junk. I mean, they were, it was just like, it was pizza boxes and, Coca-Colas, and they're out there smoking on the back porch, which was a little frustrating for us because we would waft into our house and it kind of annoyed us. But so one of the things it's so frustrating to me. I'm just like, you're absolutely right. You trade one addiction for the other, but how did that work? I mean, how hard was it to sort of get these people into an inpatient setting and then, I guess take them off sugar? How did you do that? What was the mechanism?
So we really looked at sugar addiction and sugar addiction treatment as a chemical and a process addiction. So we looked at the way that it affected like the dopamine response in the same way that cocaine or heroin does. So you eat sugar to feel like, to change the way you're feeling and to feel good, right? So it's a chemical addiction. And then a behavioral addiction is when you use a behavior that becomes addictive, like gambling and sex addiction, and eating disorder. So we looked at treating sugar and refined carb addiction as both substance and behavioral, and which meant that we had to so it was complete abstinence from sugar and refined carbs. That was the chemical part of it. So as we removed the illegal drugs and substances from people when they came in and they detoxed, so we did with refined carbs and sugar. And as we help people with the behavioral addictions by looking at the emotional, psychological, spiritual component to addiction, so we did with sugar and carb addiction. And so actually everyone in the clinic was put on a low carbohydrate diet because we found that it benefited absolutely every single patient in that it helped stabilize moods. It helped improve their health, their physical health, mental health, emotional health. It was amazing what that one nutritional intervention did, not only for the sugar addicts, but for all the patients in the clinic. And so the way we would treat the sugar and carb addicts is that we would do one-on-one counseling, spiritual facilitation, group facilitation. They would do exercise with a biokineticist 3 times a week. We did like various other things like massage therapy and equine therapy and acupuncture and a whole lot of stuff. But really the core of the program was looking at the underlying causes for addiction, the often grounded in trauma, early childhood trauma, connecting that, for instance, like caregivers not being available emotionally to soothe and nurture and teach their kids how to deal with emotions, and then how those kids then turn to sugar and refined carbs to like feed this need, this comfort, this just feeling loved and accepted and appreciated by using sugar and carbs. And that was a big thing for me in my life. I realized when I went into rehab for my cocaine and alcohol addiction, when I really started working on it, I realized that my addiction had started at the age of 4 with sugar and refined carbs. We had a big trauma in the family. My uncle committed suicide, and like the grown-ups in my family, because of the trauma that they had to deal with, they just withdrew. And so they weren't available to my brother and I to help us deal with this big trauma in a way that would have been, like helped us just develop emotionally and psychologically as humans. And from there, I often think that, when kids are addicted to sugar, does that then later translate into alcoholism, which is just a theory, like don't quote me on that. But so much of what we saw at the clinic, and when we went back into people's childhood histories, there was this early addiction to an external substance, and often food related. And obviously no one binges on broccoli or steak. So it was always the refined sugar, refined carbs that that there was definitely a foundation there that later led to other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the no one
Did I
binging on
freeze?
broccoli, or no one, am I on mute still? Yeah, no, you can hear me. So no one binging on broccoli, no one binging on carbs is I think a pretty interesting point. Um, that was, I guess, several, I don't know how many years ago that's been, but I mean, would you change the way you manage that inpatient clinic now today if you had the opportunity?
Yes, I would make everyone carnivore, but which is like a difficult thing to say, obviously. But there's also that like huge vegan vegetarian movement in South Africa as there is here, and I know like just from seeing you on Instagram, like what you've been through, obviously. But I definitely would limit the choices that they have at the beginning, at least, because it just makes such a difference. Like being carnivore is so simple, especially when I don't think about it. So I would make that change for sure.
Yeah, I mean, something I think you recently, and by the way, you look fantastic. I'm just looking at your screen. Looks like even from the last time I saw you, look like you've gotten even more healthy and healthy looking than you were before. So good for you.
Thank
But
you.
I know you'd mentioned that you'd kind of recently more embraced a carnivore and felt like it's been a bit positive. Can you talk about that briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first time I did the carnivore experiment was a 3-month experiment, almost exactly a year ago. So I had to go in for a surgery, and I wanted to use a nutritional approach that would help be the most beneficial to my healing process, and also limit inflammation in my body. And so from the research and stuff that I did from your book, I was like, wow, this carnivore thing is probably the very best option for me right now, and it's probably the thing that's going to serve me the most. And so let me do my labs at the beginning of the 3 months, because I had to anyway for the surgery, and let me do my labs at the end of the 3 months. And it was really, really interesting, because for the first time in my life, I did not want to binge, because like nothing in protein and fat gave me any kind of dopamine response that led me to craving more. And there's absolutely no way I can overeat steak. And so for the 3 months, I literally only did red meat. I did ribeyes. I would just throw it on the grill in the morning. I was lucky because my kids were with my husband at that time, and they had gone away for 3 months. So I literally only had to look after myself. And so that made it a lot easier, in that I could only cook meat and I didn't have to worry about anybody else. And my labs, considering what I went through and that I wasn't really able to exercise as I normally do, my labs improved. I felt amazing. My skin had never been better. It was just like such an awesome experiment in showing what a simple change can make to my overall health, both physically, but also like more so for me emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah, that last little statement, I think, is a very, very fine and important point about the emotional and the psychological benefits. Because, and while that is a very controversial subject to say that nutrition, impacts our mental health, I think it's clear that it does. I mean, I think it's very clear. And, as you know, I've been a very vocal advocate for this style of eating. For not everybody needs to do it. I've never claimed that, but I think for those people that are suffering from various different maladies, whether physical or traditional physical disease or mental health disorders, this seems to help significantly. And it's one of the things that, we're talking about. As you may or may not know, we're trying to get a clinical trial done. So we're in the
Yeah.
we're in the fundraising process. And in fact, I've got an interview with another researcher right after this. We're interviewing research teams that we think can maybe do this, and so on and so forth. And some of the things are like, what are our endpoints going to be? And we discuss, with can you make mental health claims based on some of these things? And we're not. Depends on, like I said, depends on the size of the study and that type of stuff and what we can afford to do. But I'm clearly convinced, just by seeing the people that I interact with every single day. I mean, and I guarantee there's several people in this little group now that would echo what you say with regard to mental health and clarity of thought and better mood. And some of them, frankly, just, they were struggling with, diagnosed whether it's depression, bipolar, anxiety disorder, even people with PTSD seem to benefit, which is really, I think, a very interesting thing. And so, I just, I know there's a guy named Chris Palmer out of Harvard that's doing similar stuff with ketogenic diets, which, very much this diet often can be and often is, not necessarily, but many times can be. Let me just go back to CrossFit Health. I guess that's still, and obviously, I think that was one of Greg Glassman's projects, and obviously he's no longer with the organization. And I don't want to necessarily get into that, but you have a new CEO, new ownership. Are they as dedicated to CrossFit Health in your view as previous sort of administration was? What's your thoughts on that?
You know what? I think they are, but in a very different way, which is super exciting for me. The work Greg did was visionary and amazing, and just like he disrupted healthcare in a big way, within the CrossFit community, and then also with his legal battles in the greater community. And so Greg is such a pioneer in that space, and he was always up for a good fight. He really, really was. And so the things that he did with like the NSCA and Coca-Cola and lifestyle, Coca-Cola as like lifestyle medicine or whatever, and exposing the ties that like David Katz and those people have to what's it called? International Life Science Institute, and seeing how that's a proxy for Coca-Cola, like that stuff's huge. And so really CrossFit Health started out as an investigation into the ills of modern medicine, looking at the mess that our healthcare system is in and how we got here. And so during Greg's time, like the 3 years that I was with CrossFit and that we started CrossFit Health, it really was looking at the mess, looking at people's personal experience of experiencing the mess, looking at how Professor Noakes was targeted, Gary Fettke was targeted. We were going to look at how you were targeted. We were really looking at how healthcare is so sick in an effort to start healing it. And I don't think we can necessarily, I don't think US healthcare is about health. I think it's about profits and, maximizing all of that stuff. So CrossFit really has been a great solution in helping people get healthy. So CrossFit is a great way to get anyone healthy. And there's been a stigma that CrossFit is only for elite athletes and that you have to be a certain type of person to do these intensely, high intensity workouts. And so CrossFit Health was also a way in which to bring attention to the fact that CrossFit is for everyone. Every single thing that we do is scalable. And so that's really where Greg's focus was in the beginning. Eric Rose has just taken over CrossFit. He is the CEO. I think we were waiting on the government approval to make sure that there's not any fraud in the company being handed over. And so we haven't really gotten started, but I am super excited to take CrossFit Health to the next level, to see how we can involve physicians and medical professionals and healthcare providers in providing a space for health creation that sits outside the traditional healthcare system.
Yeah, and that term health creation, I've been using for quite a while now, and it sort of seems odd that you have to even use that term, but I mean, you're absolutely right. The current healthcare system is not about health. It is very much about disease maintenance or disease management, however you want to put that. I've gone even so far as to calling it disease maintenance, because it's very much a top-down approach. And when I say that, it's, basically most of the innovation in the sort of direction of healthcare is basically sort of started with pharmaceutical companies. They have an idea that they're going to make a drug that's going to make, for the and again, we have to realize the overarching goal of these companies is to answer to their shareholders and their, the board of directors, and that's a financial incentive. I am very much aware of that, as I'm trying to position this MeterX company and understanding that those things are the primary goals. And so when we start with the supposition that our first goal is profit, and then, if it happens to have a mild positive benefit on sick people, then we're going to do that. Whereas what we're seeing, and I think the health creation thing is really a bottom up approach. And I think this is what this is, because as I spend, literally every single day of my life, 365 days a year, meeting with folks like this, asking them questions, gathering information, asking what's working for you, what's not working for you, what's working for you in this particular condition, how do you change diet and lifestyle, that becomes this bottom up thing. And and I think that is a way forward. It's saying, and again, it's going to be lifestyle directed. It's not going to be drug directed, which I think is a very, very different way. And whether it's exercise, via things like CrossFit, or diet via low carb diets, keto, even carnivore diets, or, whatever diet works. But I mean, I think that's really what we have to do to change this, because as you and I know, it's frustrating. Well, I mean, it's frustrating for me to go out in public and just see the absolute, literally decay in societal health. I mean, we go out there and it's almost painful. You feel for these people because you're looking, the solution is so much simpler than what they've probably been taught and what they believe. And, it's just, how do you reach these people? You want to walk up to them and just shake them and say, hey, but you can't force people. And I love the idea of inpatient, because then you kind of almost have total control. And that would be my fantasy, would be to take a bunch of people and bring them to a nice place, but can kind of have some control over what they do. To say, look, we're gonna get you guys healthy whether you like it or not. And that would be fun for me. But so what is your day to day these days? And since I know it's maybe up in the air, but let's just say what has it been for the last year or so?
Like what, in what way?
With work. I'm talking about the
Oh, okay, got it.
working operations.
Well, we work remotely, and so I work from home most of the time, which is, as wonderful as it sounds, it's also like super challenging because I have two boys, and when COVID hit, it's just been an absolute disaster, and I don't even know if they can read or string a sentence together anymore, because it's just been, I just, having to work and trying to homeschool kids is impossible. Anyway, before that, it would be, we would have, we would travel a lot with Greg. We had a lot of meetings in person at the office in Santa Cruz for CrossFit HQ. And we would host these amazing events called the Medical Doctor Level 1 seminars. We would get physicians through CrossFit to HQ, and they would do a 2-day level 1 seminar where we took them through the CrossFit methodology, looked at the nutrition and everything else that they needed to become CrossFit coaches and later CrossFit affiliates if they chose. And then alongside that, we found that so many of the doctors who had done the level 1 seminar wanted to come back because they suddenly felt like they had a space where they had peers who understood what they were going through, and that were also excited about creating changes in the healthcare system. And so from that stemmed the DDC, which is Greg called the Derelict Doctors Club. So we got a whole lot of these derelict doctors who weren't necessarily mainstream in their beliefs about health and nutrition and fitness to come back. And we started hosting these really cool seminars, which I also wanted you to speak at before all of this happened. And then, so we had people like Gary Taubes, Jason Fong, Dom D'Agostino, or just like Thomas Seyfried, like all our guys came and they did these lectures over this weekend, and we would have so much fun looking at healthcare and how we could change it in a very positive way. And then we had the annual Games Conference, which was also like just a bigger version of those smaller events where during the CrossFit Games, we would get together and have like a medical conference. And so my day-to-day really wasn't very set, but it always included a CrossFit workout, not always very intense. My normal work day where I would basically like do emails and things from the morning until like mid-afternoon, and then traveling a lot all over the country and to other countries to visit affiliates and to talk about CrossFit Health.
Let's go back to, it's interesting because obviously Tim Noakes is someone I think is very special. In fact, I was very honored that he's asked me to write a few chapter or so in one of his upcoming textbooks. So I'm working on that as well. But, like I said, my mother was for South African, so I got to go down there quite a bit when I was a kid. And the last time I was there was 1992, and I was, I guess, in my early 20s, and would really love to get back down there at some point. For those that have never been, it's just a beautiful, beautiful country with beautiful, beautiful people too. And but I think this is a thing that is interesting to me because we have, with regard to, obviously Banting has gotten, and for those that don't know, Banting, named after William Banting, I can't remember what his job was. He was, this kind of obese
Undertaker.
guy. Undertaker, yeah, that's right. he was this obese guy from the late 1800s. It was, struggling. He wrote this letter on corpulence, but he was told, initially to exercise and eat less. He was rowing and he couldn't lose weight. And then someone told him to cut out carbs and he dropped a bunch of weight. So that's where that sort of term banting came from. But that has been my understanding is that that's been a really popular trend in South Africa and I assume it's still growing. I've seen Rita Ventnor's group, his Facebook group, 2 million people or 2 million plus people now. But it's interesting that in these smaller countries, and Ivor's not here today, but there's a large group of carnivore people in Iceland. About, of their 300,000 people, something over 3,000 of them have tried carnivore, which is tremendous. I mean, that would be the equivalent
Wow.
that'd be the equivalent of 3 million plus people in the US doing it. And so I find that, what do you think the differences? We just saw that in Mexico and I don't know if you saw this. One of the not provinces, one of the states in Mexico, Oaxaca, I think is how you say that, just recently outlawed children, not adults, but children being able to go buy sodas and junk food, I assume candy, because of the obesity problem, and secondarily because the fact that this coronavirus is shining a bigger spotlight on comorbid conditions, and obesity being one of them. And so I just find that why do you think the United States in particular is so resistant to, I mean, I have my theories, but what are your thoughts on why is it maybe harder to do something like this in the United States versus Iceland or South Africa or even Mexico?
Well, there's a reason why the United States is like, the economy that it is, right? I mean, it's about profit. It's about like consumer goods. It's all about driving profit in every single industry. I don't think that there is much regard for human health when it comes to companies like Coca-Cola or any of the food and beverage companies, really, looking at their bottom line. And so it's hard. And, I must say, like when I moved from South Africa to the US, I realized it was going to be a bit of a culture shock, but I didn't realize just how shocking it was going to be faced with this food system that you guys have here. I mean, the supermarkets are just insane. Like the natural food part of it is tiny, and there's just like so much overwhelming junk food and like processed stuff to choose from. Like everybody's not, like no one's into cooking. Like what happened to people cooking? I don't understand. Like because from South Africa, like we don't have all these prepackaged goods. When at least a couple of years ago, we didn't really have access to all these prepackaged foods or going to a restaurant every day just because we couldn't afford it. And so I feel that I think the problem in the US lies with big corporations being driven by profit. We have very skewed health messages because of the pharmaceutical funding, because of the big industry funding. A lot of the scientists are compromised in the research studies that they put out. And so, there's just so much at play that we're not aware with, and we are being lied to constantly. And I think that's the problem. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely the I guess the prime example of excess. I mean, excessive wealth, excessive access to food.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, your point about cooking. There was a survey done a couple of years back about it was concerning because young people were not eating as much cereal, and that really much upsets the cereal companies because they really they want to sell us their cheap agricultural waste product with sugar on it. And the reason cited for not eating as much cereal is because eating cereal was too much work because you had to rinse a bowl. So they would rather have a package you could rip open, like a little candy bar, like a protein bar. You rip open the package, throw the package in the trash, and you eat it. You don't have to clean a bowl. So we've gone from not cooking to not even wanting to rinse a friggin' dish. I mean, this is, whatever the millennial, or I don't even know what the next generation Z or X or whatever they're called. This is what we've got coming. And so, and the food industry is very responsive to that. They really want this fuel, this human fuel that's got everything you need. You just drink it down, and you don't need to do anything else. And so as we devote less and less time to cooking and perhaps more and more time to playing video games and living in virtual reality and staring mindlessly at our television, that nutrition is becoming an afterthought. And it's like, if it doesn't make you acutely sick or kill you right away, and it tastes good. And by the way, we can put it and make it taste really sweet and sugary. And so one of the things, this you can't be in the space I'm in, and as you see these companies out there that are getting funded to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars, by the way, of what the food system is going to. And if you think it's bad now, 20 years from now, it won't even be recognizable. I mean, we literally are looking at cotton. Cotton has been approved by the USDA for human consumption. Normally we can't eat cotton. We turn it into shirts, right? But now we've figured out a way to GMO engineer cotton so we can remove this substance called gossypol. Gossypol is toxic to humans and other animals. That's why cows don't graze on cotton, I think. So they've been able to, again, GMO it. So the gossypol isn't expressed in the seed, which is where they would grind up the paste to make a protein, and then they would stick it. And then the plan is to stick it into processed food, just like they stick in methylcellulose, which is basically sawdust. They're developing another fat. Now, some of us will remember olestro, which was a fat that wasn't absorbed by the human body, but it ended up with everybody just having diarrhea all the time. And so, but they're developing a new fat that's got this, I can't remember the exact technology, but it's very similar, but it's supposed to be also, it's fat you can eat that you don't absorb the calories from. And so the goal is, they're going to make all these fatty desserts with, artificial sweetener, and you can gorge on this stuff and not gain body weight potentially. And most people say, oh, that sounds great. I can live on processed junk and not get fat. But at the same time, what are the side effects down the road? Maybe you get more cancer, maybe you have more autoimmune disease, maybe you have more depression, because everything isn't determined of, obviously the obesity crisis is a huge problem, but, if we, it's like what you're saying, trading cocaine addiction for sugar addiction. So we're trading an obesity issue for a mental health issue. Is it better? And I mean, the answer to me is no. We need to go back eating foods that humans were designed to eat. So it's frightening, and I almost see it as inevitable. And I say almost. I think if enough of us stand up and just say, look, we're just not going to buy that stuff. We are, and I don't know what that critical mass is. At the very least, we need to protect the food supply that gives us health. And, in my view, that's, animal agriculture, and particularly directly supporting ranchers and farmers and stuff like that. I think that's so important. What else was I going to say? I want to let you talk, because I can talk forever, and I do. I spend all day talking, doing interviews, but, let's talk about sugar addiction a little more, because I think that is something that, many people deny. There's many people out there in the world that say, oh, sugar's fine. It's, if you eat it in moderation, it's totally healthy. Coca-Cola would tell you that. As you know, there's been a study came out showing as recently as 2015 through 2017, Coca-Cola was still paying for science, undermining science. So can you go a little bit more into sugar addiction?
Absolutely. So I think the big problem obviously is like we're in that denial phase of sugar not being addictive. We're looking at a calorie being a calorie, when a calorie really isn't a calorie. A calorie is, we're trying to figure out what the most nutrient dense calorie is for us to consume. And that never is sugar or refined carbs or any combination of sugar, salt, and fat, which like stimulates that bliss point. And so sugar addiction really is, the addictive centers of the brain are activated by rewards that we give ourselves, whether it's behavioral or chemical. And so anytime that those reward centers are stimulated through what we eat or what we do, opioids and dopamine are released. And the studies that like a lot of people, like Nicole Lavina has done studies, and a lot of them have been on rats and, things that a lot of people will argue aren't necessarily appropriate for human beings. There's no doubt that sugar spikes dopamine release in a similar way that cocaine spikes dopamine release, and it activates the reward center of the brain and follows that cycle of addiction, which is like binging, withdrawal, craving, and cross-sensitization. And so like for myself, when I start eating sugar, I can't stop. I can't open a bag or a box or whatever of jelly beans and just have 1 or 10. You know, I've tried numerous times. I still try at times. You know, when I really need that emotional comfort, I'll try have a couple and put it away. And I promise you, it's this obsession. I'll go sit on the couch, I'll try to do something else, and it's literally like those jelly beans are calling me to finish them. And it's weird, I almost have like this emotional relationship with them where I'm like, oh shame, they may feel left out if I don't eat them. And so okay, I've got to eat them all because then none of them will feel left out. And it's so crazy. It's so crazy. Like I can admit how crazy this behavior is, but that to me is addiction, a compulsive pursuit of like a substance or a behavior despite the negative consequences. And that is addiction. And so if you're eating sugar and you feel guilty, ashamed, or fearful, you know, that addictive emotional component of sugar, of addiction, sorry, if it's affecting your life in a negative way, then there's a problem. You know, and sugar is going to affect your life in a negative way because it is going to make you unhealthy. It is going to make you miserable. It's going to give you, you know, the physical symptoms, the bad skin, bad dry skin, like the fat around the middle or everywhere else. Emotionally, it's like that roller coaster. I would go on a sugar roller coaster, and still now when I'm feeling down, or especially when I was traveling and I was feeling tired, I would like literally the only thing I would want was sugar. I wanted to boost myself with sugar. And so sugar still remains my default position, but I have tools now to live in a better way. And so sugar addiction is an addiction like anything else. And, you know, the food companies chemically engineer foods to be addictive by this perfect combination of sugar, salt, and fat that stimulates the bliss point in the brain. And Michael Moss wrote about it in his book, Salt, Sugar, Fat. You know, and the bliss point is like this perfect chemically engineered formula that leaves us like being like, fuck, oh, sorry, like, wow, that's so good. Like, it's amazing, but it leaves us craving for more. So we could eat like 6,000 calories of a food that we could never have the same of calories of meat, for instance. And it tricks our brain into not realizing that we're full or that we've had enough food, and it just leaves us craving more and more and more. And so more products are sold because that's exactly what they're trying to do.
You know, what are your thoughts? Because a lot of people, particularly, you know, and there are a lot of people that are sugar addicts. I mean, I don't doubt that to some degree, you know, I had that, or I suffered from that, or still suffer from it. I guess you could argue. I guess it's a lifelong thing. But, and some people, that's your default physiological state. Of course, you want sugar because you need the energy. But two thoughts. So when you go on a low carb or particularly a carnivore diet, you know, you're not going to, there's not a lot of dietary glucose or carbohydrates you're getting. And so you have to substitute that largely with fat. I mean, you could arguably, you could convert some of your protein into glucose via gluconeogenesis, but do you find that you feel better on maybe a higher fat approach, given that, you know, you're seeking energy? And then the other thing is comment maybe on artificial sweeteners, and are they potentially for sugar addicts just as bad?
Okay, so let me start with the artificial sweeteners, and I saw somebody mention fruit as well in the chat thing there. Artificial sugars are absolutely just as bad, if not worse. It still stimulates that sweet taste that then triggers more cravings. And there are studies that have been done on this to show that the brain really can't distinguish between sweet tastes. So whether it's fruit, whether it's candy, whether it's Coca-Cola, whether it's sweetener, like the brain really, it can't. It doesn't know what it is. It just knows that it's a sweet taste, it's safe to eat, and it makes me feel good, so I want more. So yes, so that's why in the clinic we took people off all sweet substances and carbs and things. So yes, I don't think artificial sweeteners are good. I don't even think it's a good stepping stone towards like becoming sugar free. I think you just kind of have to bite the bullet and just go cold turkey. And obviously the best thing that helps with those sugar withdrawals or carb withdrawals is fat. Like, I love fat. There's nothing I love more than fat. And so, you know, that's why I love ribeye, because it has so much fat and I can eat the fat. And so I'm not scared of fat at all. I don't have that lipophobia that I had for such a long time. But, you know, when I was in the modeling industry for a very, very long time, which also led to my drug addiction, because the drugs that I chose were ones that suppressed my appetite. And I was petrified. Like, I used to buy just like all fat-free stuff, and I used to just live on gummies because they were fat-free, and it didn't matter that they were full of sugar, because sugar really didn't come into the equation at that point in time. And so it took me a couple of years to get over this fear of fat, because I think the turning point came when I realized just how good it made me feel, how it felt like these lights went on in my brain when I really started embracing fat into my diet. And so for me, always the emotional and psychological benefit outweighs anything else. Like, yes, great, I lost weight, fantastic. I'm really grateful for it, because I can be very superficial at times. But like, really, the way that I'm feeling happy and fulfilled is of greater benefit to me than anything else. And so, now, and even with, sorry, the low carb diet and all those fake low carb desserts, like, I can't have any of that stuff. Like, I got fat on a low carb diet because, like, I still overate. When we went for dinner with Eric Westman that night, he was like, yeah, you can't have like just bowls of lettuce. Like, there's a certain point where even that becomes high carb. And we're talking about lettuce here. And so, for me, I can literally overeat anything, and even vegetables are challenging for me because I just want to overeat them. I don't even like them. And so, it's, for me, the easiest and best solution is definitely carnivore.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna take a detour. There's somebody who wants to talk a little bit about fat fasting, and just for those that aren't aware, maybe you're not aware, there are people, and if you're familiar with Jason Fung, which I know you are, and we had Megan Ramos is one of his,
Yeah.
he and him are partners, or she and he are partners kind of in some of the IDM stuff. And there's people that will, and this is more for diabetic control for more or anybody, but they'll do, instead of just a pure water fast or water and electrolyte fast, they'll just do a period of time where they're having just fat for their calories. And it's just, and it may not be a lot of calories. And there's a lot of literature on very low carb, low calorie diets that are, one, very sustainable, because the fat is so satiating. When you're eating basically pure fat like beef fat, or some people would argue things like, well, pork belly is not pure fat, but it's pretty close, that or egg yolks or something like that, that it is so satiating that you don't really feel like eating much else. I mean, you go in there and you eat 6 or 8, I'll sometimes do 20 because I'm a big guy, like 20 egg yolks, and I just want to eat the rest of the day. That's it. And that's only even 20 egg yolks, it's about 80, it's about 80 grams of fat, which is about 720 calories, which is not a lot of calories for somebody like me. But if I can do that, and I mean, I don't see, my appetite is next to none. And, the other thing is, it's interesting for me because we have a lot of diabetics in here, and we look at the diabetics and we see when they do that, their blood glucose is so well controlled, and they don't get hypoglycemic either, which is another interesting thing. And this we've known back from the 1920s. So that's just an aside. You don't have to comment on that, but I know you mentioned that fat is extremely important. When you were dealing with sugar addicts, did you find that, and I know we're going to have Nadir Ali, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nadir. He's a cardiologist out of Houston.
Yes.
Just putting out some tremendous, I remember I met him a year ago or 2 years ago now at Carnivore or a year and a half ago. And he was so excited to be going carnivore, and was and he's just kind of exploded with just being so passionate and putting out all these great informational videos. But one of the things he's been talking about recently is, and I forgot, but anyway, that's a problem. I talk so long. Anyway, I'll think of it in a second. But so we've got this fat fasting, and then we've got these, the diet. Oh, this is what he's talking about. So he's saying that there's some people that are so metabolically compromised. They've been such sugar, dependent, sugar addicts, carb dependent people for so long that just maybe a standard low carb diet just doesn't work for these people. I mean, they can't even get into ketosis. And so they have to do these extraordinary things, the extended fast and stuff like that. But did you see with some of the sugar addicts that you dealt with, what was the length of time it took? I mean, I don't know if you guys were measuring if they were going ketogenic. I don't know if ketogenic was part of your approach, but did you find that certain features would distinguish the ease or the difficulty of recovery in different individuals?
That's really interesting. I think that because most of them came in with real emotional connections to sugar and eating, the fasting wasn't really an option from the start, because they still needed that consistency because of their warped relationship with food and eating for such a long period in their lives. It was really hard to even get them off sugar, let alone ask them to not have food at all. So we had them for a 28-day inpatient program. So they stayed with us for 28 days where they had no, contact to anything outside. And we would have them in a detox unit for the first like 3 to 7 days, even though they weren't withdrawing from hard drugs. Like they still had withdrawal symptoms from coming off sugar, like whether it was like shakes, some of them had like shakes and headaches and, just like emotional, like mood swings, and because they're saying goodbye to their best friend. It's like this huge loss. And so I think they started, the diet that we had was probably about 100 grams of carbohydrates a day. And we did test whether they were in ketosis by finger prick, with the strips. And so we did monitor that. And most of them with the under 100 grams of carbs a day did get into ketosis pretty quickly. And once they were in ketosis, that is when they started feeling a lot better. The problem that we had was when they went back into like the real world, and that's where the wheels would fall off and things would be really hard. And during that time, there weren't so many online groups to support them. And so I think that was the biggest challenge, is that they didn't have that emotional community support when they left, in having people who were on the same lifestyle as them. And, with the fat fasting stuff, like, I don't know, like from an emotional perspective, looking at the psychological and emotional component of food and eating, I think fasting is hard. Fat also has a dopamine response, even though it's not as profound as sugar. I can very easily overeat fat. If it's just fat by itself. If I have fat and protein, it's the perfect combination for me because I can't overeat protein. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that does. I want to ask you, so in South Africa, was that inpatient program here, was that covered by insurance in South Africa, medical insurance?
So most of the patients who did come into the sugar addiction program suffered from an underlying psychiatric condition, whether it was depression, anxiety, bipolar. There was some underlying psychiatric condition that medical insurance did pay for. And so we were able to have a lot of the patients who came in covered by medical insurance because of the underlying psychiatric condition. So because we were a psychiatric condition hospital, we were treating depression, anxiety, and bipolar. And so we would use the sugar addiction program in conjunction with the psychiatric program in order to help these patients. So yes, we through that way, we had it covered by medical insurance. So it wasn't that they covered sugar addiction, but they covered mental health stuff.
Do you know if in the U.S. there are any, since I know you attended to start one, is there any places in the U.S. that have these inpatient, quote unquote, sugar addiction psychiatric health clinics that you're aware of? Anybody doing it in removing sugar from the diet?
I think there are quite a few people who have jumped on the bandwagon because it has become a bit of a trend and people are recognizing sugar as an addictive substance. And so I've seen quite a few of the addiction treatment centers in their marketing material mentioning that sugar is an addictive substance. I think they treat it by, moderation and by allowing grains in the diet still. And so there's no real removal of the actual addictive substance, because that would, they would lose a whole lot of clients because of that. We lost so many patients because we didn't serve sugar or refined carbs. Even like heroin addicts and cocaine addicts wouldn't come to the clinic because of that. We would find like little packets of white stuff hidden under people's beds. And, we would be like, oh my gosh, like someone smuggled cocaine into the rehab, which is a reality when you're dealing with addicts. And most of the time it turned out to be sugar. It was crazy the lengths that people would go to get sugar onto the property. And so I think there is a trend towards treating sugar as an addiction. I'm not sure if the if the nutritional intervention that these places are using is good enough.
Yeah, I see. And like I said, one of the foundational things when I personally deal with clients, when we talk to the coaches, so we have, 100 plus coaches here on the MeatRx platform. And so, one of the things I say is, you really have to fix that food relationship upfront before really anything can happen, because, if everybody keeps relapsing every 6 weeks, you just kind of lose, you're going to ultimately lose. And so it's like, I think what you said, if you had to go back and do it, start feeding everybody bacon and eggs and ribeyes, and that might physiologically obviate that desire for sugar a lot more effective than if you fed them, the sort of the pastas and the grains and the other things which kind of keep that physiology going. Because I think there is a physiologic thing, and I always make the point that there's both a psychology and a physiology. And if the physiology is not in your favor, we're never going to win that psychological battle, because it's like what Mike Tyson says: everyone has a plan until he gets punched in the face. Well, everyone has a plan until you're dealing with hunger. When you get really hungry, you can talk, oh, I'm going to do this diet and I'm going to be successful. And then you get hungry, and then you're like, oh, yeah, well, my willpower and my resolve went away, and you might be able to deal with hunger for a few days, but by day 3-4 weeks, you're like, wait a minute, this ain't gonna work. So that has been one of my most, I think, biggest messages that I get out there. And I think that is so powerful. I think there's some other people like Tro Kalayjian, another physician, who says, it's not about counting calories, counting macros. It's about dealing with appetite and, dealing with satiety. And I think that really is what, yeah, we know that if you eat too many calories, you're going to gain weight. So what? Who cares? It's like, but how do you make it happen? And I think that's the important part here. What is well, and again, not knowing what the new leadership in CrossFit is like, but what is a goal of CrossFit Health these days, and where do you see it going? What is the hopes and dreams and desires, and what can we do as a community to help make that happen?
That's such a great question. I think the goal really is to move from a very from an educational, we still want to keep the educational, but from focusing on the mess and exposing the mess to actually creating change within health creation. And so really focusing on that, looking at nutrition, looking at exercise, looking at how we can assist medical professionals and including, CrossFit into their space and vice versa. So I think it's moving from just creating a very practical application of what CrossFit Health can become, and more so than just focusing on theory and knowledge and sitting in the mess that we're in. And what you guys can do to support is I know you're CrossFitting, Sean. How's that going? Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, with the lockdown, the gym I was going to basically got locked down. It's kind of interesting. The owner of the gym emailed me, and I hadn't met him before, and he said, "Hey, I read your book. I'm totally into carnivore. Can you come do a lecture to our CrossFit? Because have you ever given lectures?" And in fact, I did. I gave a lecture in CrossFit somewhere in Honolulu. I can't remember. I think it might have been it was at a CrossFit gym in Honolulu. And so I have done a lecture. I said, yeah, I'd be happy to, but right now we're kind of stuck with the pandemic. So I just started, and then it got shut down. So I've been doing everything at home. And so I'm doing kind of not quite, because I don't have all the equipment I need, but kind of basically working there. I've kind of changed my body composition a little bit. So I'm a little bit lighter and a lot leaner. And so I'm ready to roll, but whenever the gym's kind of officially open up, but I don't want to go in there and do the wear a mask and stands. When it's normal, I'll go back and start doing that stuff. But until I've got plenty I can do at home. So that's the stuff with that. But like I said, I'm happy to talk to any audience, and certainly the CrossFit audience, and any way I can to help, because I wholeheartedly agree with the exercise philosophy of just being able to do a lot of things. I think is important, and I think it's hopefully, like I said, the thing I see, because I know the CrossFit organization is about a $5 billion industry or something along that line, and you've got a lot more resource than I do. But, like I said, maybe, hopefully we'll get there, in time. And, like I said, it's going to take a lot of, as look at what we're up against. I mean, the $5 billion
Yeah.
to the pharmaceutical industry is like a flea. That's still a flea on someone's back.
Right.
They're like $1 trillion industries. And so they're like, these guys aren't going to do anything. So, but I think if enough organizations get into this quote unquote health creation space, which I love that term, which, like I said, I've been using for quite a while now, but I think we can make a difference. I'm optimistic, even though I'm optimistic if people, do it. If people are just passive and ignore it, and then we're all in the Wall-E. Do you ever see that cartoon Wall-E? The little TV. There's a little Disney. I think it's Pixar or somebody made that.
Yes, we actually shared it on CrossFit.com.
Yeah,
I think I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, we're headed that way, and we don't want to go that way for sure.
Absolutely. And I think what you're doing is you're creating a social movement. And so all the social movements, and CrossFit is also a social movement in a different way. And so if all of us can stand together and combine our efforts and our resources, like amazing things could happen. And so thank you for all that you're doing, because you really are creating health in a really big way.
Yeah, I think, even if, and again, I'm never going to sit up there and say everybody needs to be on a carnivore diet. I think it's a wonderful tool, and it works tremendously for many, many people. And I think many people could benefit from doing it, even as a short-term intervention, 3 months or so. But at the end of the day, I think, we've got to get away from this demonization of meat and fats and cholesterol. I mean, I think that has done more damage to the health of every nation than really anything. I mean, it's probably killed more people than all wars put together. There's been more suffering because of this crazy emphasis on, cholesterol lowering and, demonizing of fat and eating these low fat and now processed fake foods. So we got to get away from that.
Absolutely.
Focus on metabolic health, which I think is a better term. And I think you and I both know what that means. Karen, thank you. I unfortunately have to go do a research meeting here in about 2 minutes.
Yay!
Please tell us where to find you, social media, how to find you in CrossFit Health, or how people that are interested in CrossFit Health can find more information about that.
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram. My handle is @sugarfreerevolution. I'm there. I'm on Twitter. I don't even know what it is, but I think it's Karen Thomson. And then my website, I lost the domain because I forgot to pay for it, but it used to be the sugarfreerevolution.com. And then obviously just at CrossFit.com. CrossFit.com is such a great resource, and I would love for you guys to go there. I actually have to jump off as well. I've got an interview with David Diamond, who, we're going to talk about cholesterol and all of that stuff for a webinar that we're hosting next Friday.
Tell David to come on over here. I asked him a while ago.
Oh, you did?
Busy, but yeah, because I love David. I think he's got some great perspective on cholesterol, and he really, kind of cuts through the BS. So anyway, well, like I said, I've got to go. Everybody, thank you so much, Karen. I can't wait to see you again in person, hopefully.
Yay!
And good luck to you, and thanks for all you do. Okay, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye-bye, folks.